Thank you, Art. Just one thing about the introduction. I went to Cornell, not SU. I don't even root for SU athletics. I remember my son one time, everyone was talking about Donovan McNabb. He was about 10 or 11, and he said, "I hate Donovan McNabb." And they said, "But why?" And my son said, "I'm a Giant fan. He plays for the Eagles." And he said, "How about SU?" And he goes, "No, I hate SU too." So he was raised well. So I have this little TV show called The Ivory Tower Half Hour. It was Thank you. Yeah. It was misnamed last week. It was actually the Ivory Tower Hour. And we only get to speak in very short bursts, which is kind of a fun thing. It makes it interesting for me to try to articulate my views in short periods of time. But I love a venue like this because I get a little bit longer. So what I'm going to do today is what I can't do on the Ivory Tower Half Hour because everybody else is talking so damn much on that show. What I'm going to try to do is to, in a few minutes, tell you what I think is going on in American national politics from the perspective of political science. We should have another talk sometime, invite me down. I don't believe political science is a science, but be that as it may, we're stuck with the title. So I would like to talk a little bit about political science. This election was really good for math, right? Math won. I'm a huge devotee of Nate Silver and his 538.com blog at the New York Times. If you don't read it, you should. I was completely on his side in this sort of fight with Joe Scarborough over what matters in predicting elections, math or instincts. Instincts are bad at predicting elections. Math is actually better. And so math has gotten an awful lot of attention, but what has not gotten a lot of attention is political science. And political science predicted this election long before the math showed up. I don't know if I did it here, but I've done it everywhere I've been asked to speak in the last 5 years, and that is that I have predicted that the Democrats would win the 2008 presidential election, that they would win the 2012 presidential election, and I'll get to 2016 momentarily. I believe in what I call the tectonic plates of American politics. These are the fundamentals. I'm not here to talk about Mitt Romney and 47%. I'm not here to talk about David Plouffe's ground game. These things come and go. They could matter. President Obama could have lost, but I think it was extremely unlikely that he would do so. I thought this 4 years ago. I thought it 3 months ago. I wavered the night of the first debate, but then I reminded myself that elections are decided by what I call the fundamentals. So let me describe the fundamentals to you. And it's based upon one of my favorite political scientists, the late E.E. Schattschneider. He has one of the great names in all of scholarship. E.E. Schattschneider developed something that he called conflict displacement. So if you just follow me for a moment, conflict displacement is a very simple concept, like all concepts in political science. And that is that if you can get the other side in conflict with itself, you're more likely to win. Now, this gets more complicated as you actually try to draw it, and I could draw it if we had, a piece of paper or something, which I don't really need. But what that means is that American politics is basically divided into two. You have Party A on one side and Party B on the other side. We call it Democrats and Republicans now, but it could be Whigs, it could be Federalists, it could be whatever it is. And certain people belong to Party A, and certain people belong to Party B. And the reason they belong to Party A and Party B is that they disagree about a central set of issues. We call that the partisan cleavage, okay? So in American politics since 1932, if you allow me for one more second, that has been the role of the federal government in intervening in the economy for the purposes of ameliorating the effects of the business cycle. Any student who's ever had me in class has heard me say this a million times. The role of the federal government intervening in the economy for the purposes of ameliorating the effects of the business cycle. Sometimes business goes up. This is all the economics I know, fellas. I don't even own a Ouija board. Sometimes I don't think political science is a science, but I know economics isn't. So sometimes it goes up, and then sometimes it goes down. And when it goes down, we have a fight in American politics over whether the government ought to intervene to ameliorate the effects of that decrease. That was the fight between Franklin Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover in 1932. That was the fight between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney in 2012. It's a very interesting fact about American politics. In the meantime, though, we have issues that are called cross-cutting cleavages. Follow the sort of geography. These are issues that divide the parties, not one against the other, all Democrats on this side, right? You rarely find a Republican that says, what should we do? Intervene in the economy for the purpose of ameliorating the effects of the business cycle, right? That's not what Republicans think. So if you have an issue where all the Republicans think one thing and all the Democrats think another, that's the central division. But when you have issues that divide one party against itself, so the line cuts in a funny way. It doesn't say Democrats are on this side and Republicans are on that side. It says, on this line, some Democrats are fighting with other Democrats, and some Republicans are fighting with other Republicans. You still with me? And the key to success is to draw that line so that it divides the other party more dramatically than yours. If you want a really clear example of how this worked, race and the Democratic Party from about 1954 to 1968 or 72. There was no racial division in the Republican Party. They were all white. The racial division was in the Democratic Party. I introduced students to that great television show, All in the Family, which none of them have ever seen, but people think that American society was divided in the 1960s. It wasn't. The Democratic Party was divided in the 1960s. The fight about race was in the Democratic Party. The fight about Vietnam was in the Democratic Party. The fight about feminism was in the Democratic Party. I always talk about my grandfather. He voted for Democrats because they were party of Franklin Roosevelt. When they became the party of Jesse Jackson, Gloria Steinem, and Abby Hoffman, he was quite happy to vote for Richard Nixon. My favorite anecdote, when he came home from the polls in 1972, and I said, "Who'd you vote for, Pop?" And he said, "It's a secret ballot." So when the issues were dividing the Democrats, the Republicans reaped the benefits. The white South flooded out of the Democratic Party into the Republican Party. The so-called Northern ethnic vote, which is a euphemism for Jews and Catholics, that left the Democratic Party largely in the upper Midwest and the Northeast, and you constructed what we call now the Reagan coalition, right? And that dominated politics for a very long time. Well, guess what? That coalition is now coming apart because the issues, the differences, no longer divide the Democratic Party. They now divide the Republican Party. I was just saying to my lunch partners here, in 1972, you'd have to be a pretty partisan Republican to want to watch the convention that renominated Richard Nixon. I mean, why would you want to watch that? A bunch of white people gathered in Miami in 1972, chanted 4 more years, and sent Nixon out to run for re-election. The fun was in the Democratic Party. Even more fun in '68 when they're actually hitting themselves over the head with billy clubs. But the Democrats were divided and there were fights and who's seating delegations and screaming. That was interesting politics. Now, why would you watch the 2012 Democratic Convention, which coronates Barack Obama? They couldn't go out to the Denver Stadium anymore and make it look like the Roman Empire because of bad weather. But no one's interested in that. The fun is in the Republican Party, where Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum and Romney and them, all the sort of divisions and fights. So this is where Schatzschneider comes in. I call it my televised convention test. If the televised convention is interesting, they're going to lose. Because the conflict has been displaced to their side. And Republicans now are fighting with other Republicans. Look at what's happened just in the last few days. Fascinating politics, and I'll get back to these issues in a moment. Sean Hannity, a very important figure on the right of American politics in the Republican Party, said the other night on his TV show, we need to get the issue of immigration off the table. Forget about it. Don't talk about it anymore. Wow. Bill Kristol, sometimes called Billy Crystal by the disrespectful, was on, I think, Face the Nation or Fox or whatever he was on Sunday, and he said, you know, if we raise taxes on millionaires, it's really not going to destroy the country. Wow. Imagine. That sort of thing is not being said in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not saying, let's change our policy on immigration. The Democratic Party is saying, you know what, let's not tax people making over $250,000. Those issues are settled in the Democratic Party. There's no fight about it. So here is why the Republicans are in such a difficult position. Now, does it mean they can't win? Of course not. Politics is a 52-48 sport, right? It's always close. We call them period effects. Things could happen. Weather, terrorism, who knows? But the fundamentals, the tectonic plates of American politics at the moment greatly benefit the Republicans. And I'll give you a series of cross-cutting issues that do this. Then I'll make a final comment about the partisan cleavage of economic division, and then I'll open it up for your questions. The demographic challenge of the Hispanic vote is a serious, serious issue for the Republican Party. If you went back to the 1988 election, where Michael Dukakis, now in the Witness Protection Program at Northeastern University, when Michael Dukakis lost to George Herbert Walker Bush, if the Hispanic vote available to Barack Obama had been available to Michael Dukakis that year, I've seen the math, he would have won. The United States population is becoming more diverse. That's not an argument. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. And a political party that spent a good bit of its primary elections arguing over who were going to be more aggressive in promising to deport illegal aliens, or so-called illegals, is not going to be in a good position to capture that vote. You can argue with me if you like in the question-answer period. It just isn't. And that population is going to get larger, more politically engaged, and more of them will vote. I heard this statistic, I don't know if it's true. 1,000 World War II veterans are dying a month maybe, and 10,000 Hispanics are turning 18. So there are 10 times more Latino voters joining the electorate than there are old white men. And if the Republican Party thinks they're going to continue to win elections by the people who are at the convention nominating Mitt Romney, they have a rude awakening on their horizon. And Sean Hannity, who's a lot of things but not an idiot, knows that. Second, the so-called war on women. This is a very interesting matter also, because of course there are many women who vote Republicans. People sometimes think when you say these things like 100%, it's never that. It's a 53-47 sport. But the Republican policies about contraception this term, and we could debate if we had more time whether those were appropriate or not. I don't do policy. I tell students that all the time. There's another window down the hall. I don't do policy, I do politics. I'm a sports fan. I'm in this to see who's winning and who's losing. It's not a matter of principle. And the way in which contraception or access to contraception under health insurance policies mandated by the Affordable Care Act was a very large loser for the Republican Party. The Republicans these days are now saying, well, married women voted for us. Well, yeah, married women might be slightly less concerned about access to contraceptive services than single women are. The Republican Party, again, if it thinks it's going to build a majority on that sort of what I would call draconian, religiously based policy, they should think again. They may be right. Again, I'm not debating whether that's an infringement on the religious liberty rights of Catholic universities and hospitals, but politically it's extremely problematic for them. The other thing I think is young people. We thought that Barack Obama had mobilized young people in 2008 in a kind of a special way. I know this because my kids are 23 and 21, so they're sort of Obamian voters, you know? It's like hope and change, you know? And I'm like, yeah, well, fundamental tectonics of American politics. But that seems to have not only been a 2008 phenomenon, but this is a very interesting thing. And this is something I think I know a little bit about from spending so much time with young people. The social issues agenda that worked so well to divide Democrats against each other 30, 20, even 15 years ago is not working so well anymore. They used to say, Nixon said the great thing in 1968, we're going to run on the 3 A's, abortion, acid, and amnesty. We're going to tell Catholics that if you elect Hubert Humphrey, your daughters will have abortions, your sons will run off to Canada, and they'll all be taking LSD while they do it. Because the Democrats are these sort of social liberals, and we have to associate ourselves with traditional American values, and we'll get these kind of Tim Byrnes' grandfather to consider voting for us on the basis of Democrats being a bunch of radicals, right? Well, that's not really how it plays anymore. And I'll give you one issue that fascinates me and the Republican Party I predict will soon get on the right side of, and that is gay marriage. It is simply a fact that the generation that is now studying at Colgate and people slightly older than them, this is not an issue on which they are divided. Again, does that mean you can't find members of the Colgate College Republicans who oppose gay marriage? I'm sure you can. Some of them may be here today, but it's not 52-48. It's 78-22. There was a fascinating article in the New York Times the other day. Bill Keller went to Miami University to interview Paul Ryan's mentor, an economics professor who introduced him to Ayn Rand, and the president of the College Republicans. This was a fascinating article. So he went to interview this economics professor, and the professor was like, we love Paul Ryan. He's going to do what we want him to do, lower regulation, unleash the great power of America. What you would expect a libertarian economics professor at Miami University to say. And the reporter said, okay, that's good, but what about Paul Ryan's views on gay marriage? And the economics professor said, well, I don't agree with him on that. I'm a libertarian. And I think I'm the future of the Republican Party because we say we will unleash people's economic freedom, but we won't limit their personal freedom. Well, you can always find quirky economics professors who believe all sorts of things. So then he goes and interviews the president of the College Republicans, and we love Paul Ryan, I mean, imagine if Paul Ryan would go, it's kind of they were proud of it, etc. We were all with him unleashing it. And the guy said, what about gay marriage? And the president of the College Republicans at Miami University said, yeah, we don't really talk about that very much. Why? Many of our members are for it. Of course they are. And many more members in the future will be for it. Again, we could debate this if you like. I have my own views, but I'm not here to talk about the moral position of same-sex marriage in American politics. I'm saying it's over. And if a political party thinks that it's going to win elections on the basis of putting a very small finger in a very large hole in a very powerful dike, they have another thing coming. Will it take time? Of course it will take time. There are now about 30 states in the country who have constitutional provisions restricting marriage to one man, one woman, but those won't last. When the Colgate graduates of 2013, 15, 20, and 22 become powerful figures in American politics at the state level, all of those laws will be changed, and it will soon be as embarrassing then to have opposed gay marriage now as it is embarrassing now to have opposed mixed racial marriage 40 years ago. It's over, and the Republican Party has to come to terms with it. Finally, we're talking about the things that divide the Republican Party, but here's a really interesting thing about the central issue, because you've got to work at defining that as well, and this was Ronald Reagan's brilliance as a politician, and Franklin Roosevelt, and this is what great presidents do. Ronald Reagan didn't win only because he gathered my grandfather in the White South on the basis of social issues. He won those people because they were no longer benefiting from programs of the federal government. The New Deal coalition was a grand welfare program to white middle-class people. GI Bill, cheap mortgages, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, every student loans, money flooding out of the Democratic Party to my family. Till suddenly we were living out on Long Island with 2 cars in the driveway and a pool in the backyard. And Ronald Reagan said to my grandfather, hey Jim, what you getting from the Democratic Party lately? And Jim said, nothing. And Reagan said, where are your taxes going? And Jim said, they're going to poor black people. And Reagan said, is that what the Democratic Party was designed to do? Come, Jim. Vote for me, not as a beneficiary of governmental programs, but as a funder of them for people who don't belong to your social cohort. absolutely brilliant, absolutely successful. And that has dominated American politics for the last 32 years. These things, by the way, always go in 32-year cycles. I told you, it's a science. And what's the challenge of Barack Obama and the Democratic Party today? Not to my grandfather, who died many years ago, but to say to the great middle class, whatever that is, let's say it's people making between $75,000 and $200,000 a year, which sounds like a lot of money unless you live in urban America and its suburbs. So let's say it's those people. And Barack Obama's, who get financial aid at Colgate, by the way. Barack Obama's challenge, the challenge of the Democratic Party, is to redefine the economic argument. It's no longer about you're paying taxes to fund those people. It ought to now be you're paying taxes because the really rich aren't. We have to have a state. We need an army. We need bridges. We need education. We need basic research. Who's going to pay for that? You or the Board of Trustees of Colgate University? And the position of the Republican Party at the moment is you. At least that's how it's presented and understood in the public realm. I know if you actually look at the amount of dollars and all of that. But the challenge for Barack Obama as a politician, and by the way, he's a lot better at running for president than he is at being president. Many Democrats are right to fear that the person who negotiates with John Boehner and Mitch McConnell is that somnambulant guy at the first debate. I mean, can you imagine if that guy goes in with Mitch McConnell? Mitch McConnell's got his watch, he's got his wallet, he's driving his car home. So Barack Obama has to be much more aggressive in redefining the economic issue today. It's no longer the New Deal giving stuff to my grandfather. It's no longer my grandfather paying taxes to give stuff to other people. Now the question is, who's going to fund this state that we have to have? And if the Republican Party is willing to place America in default in order to preserve the 35% rather than 39.6% tax rate of people who make over $250,000, which is their current position, and if Barack Obama can't win that with the middle class, he's a lousy politician. And he may be. So we'll see what happens over the next 4 years about these divisions, but I will end with, as I promised in the title, by predicting that the next president of the United States is Hillary Rodham Clinton.
You stuck with it. You stuck with it. That's what you said 4 years ago.
So, questions? Denunciations? Yeah. Art's going to demand equal time, I think.
While you're at it, I'm slowly getting over it. No, let's mix it up, and if any of the students want to ask questions, here we are. So we've got quite a bit of time yet, so let's go for it.
I was wondering if you could comment on the influence of money on politics as a result of this election.
Yeah. I think this won't be a popular thing to say. I think the influence of money in American politics is overrated. I think there's a lot of it, but, well, let me back up by saying, I don't think it determines elections. What it does is determine what interests are advanced once the elections have been held. So I don't think that Romney and Obama, they just sort of raised a lot of money and fought each other, and that was sort of a wash. I said on TV the other night, you can only buy an election if the other side isn't trying to buy it also. And so what you had here was two people showing up at the candy store with huge amounts of money. And I think that was sort of a wash. However, I do think that part of what limits Barack Obama's ability to do what I just suggested he ought to do in order to solidify a new coalition in the Democratic Party is how beholden he has heretofore been to certain financial interests. Wall Street got really mad at him. They sort of threw a hissy fit. And they didn't give him as much money this time. So he might notice that and not spend so much time trying to satisfy their interest. I think now we will wade into policy, which I prefer not to do. The biggest mistakes Barack Obama made were very early in his term when he appointed Rahm Emanuel, Tim Geithner, and Larry Summers. these people are not the people who are going to lead the Democratic Party, the kind of future I'm talking about. So now they're all quitting, right? Geithner maybe leaving the country so we don't catch up with his, well, anyway. Yeah. We'll see who Obama appoints. I hear Erskine Bowles, and then I throw my hands up again and say, okay, well, you know, he's owned by someone else. So I think money does do that in terms of policy. But in this election, they both had a lot of money. Yes?
When I went to collect the ballots for Hamilton 1 and 2, we had a record turnout. I found out that 400 students were registered at Colgate.
Yes.
And they credit that there, the Board of Electors, to 2 or 3 very sharp kids who came in, downloaded all the information, added the applications, and consequently every form that we got was completely filled out, knew the difference between residential
Right.
and such.
Couldn't be turned down by people trying to suppress the vote.
They showed up and they were enthusiastic, a lot of first-time voters. I gave them stickers, my
Yeah.
vote counted, and they were thrilled. They wanted their picture taken at the center.
Right.
And in contrast to that, to Morrisville, where 300 youngsters were eligible to vote, 22 was all they got back. And we did have, I filled out like 34 affidavit ballots for youngsters who were from the downstate communities. But I did have youngsters from Texas, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Connecticut who thought they should be able to vote in this federal election and were here. But it was a great election. And I'm glad.
Well, that's inspiring for Colgate. Let me say 2 quick things about that. One, some years ago, I was teaching an introductory class in political science, and we had a contest. Everybody in the class had to try to register as many people as they could, and the top 2 had dinner with me at the Poolville Country Store. As if that's a prize. But it was kind of fun. But I will say, again, let's talk about this another time because it's outside the parameters here. I have been trying to convince a student at Colgate, I've been at Colgate 21 years. For 21 years, I've been trying to convince a student at Colgate to run for mayor. And if that's true, that there are 400 registered voters at Colgate, then I may succeed.
However, the election is in June.
Well, you moved it to June to try to destroy my plan. I don't think I wasn't paying any attention.
Comment on the politics of the fiscal cliff.
Yeah. The politics of it are really interesting. This is the first opportunity for President Obama to show that he understands how negotiations work. President Obama has this very odd thing of negotiating with himself before he shows up to negotiate with the other side. So here's what I would propose if I were recommending. What will happen with what's really, they're trying to change it to the fiscal curb rather than the fiscal cliff, but what's really going to happen on taxes is that all of the Bush tax cuts will expire on January 1st. In effect, having everyone's taxes go up. I would recommend that Barack Obama not only allow that to happen, but give a speech every day between now and then announcing that he wants that to happen. Because the Senate has already passed a bill that rescinds that for everyone under $250,000. So what I think Obama should do is refuse to sign any bill that doesn't raise taxes on over $250,000. The Republicans will refuse to enter into that agreement with him, let the taxes all expire, and then on January 2nd, take the Senate bill, send it to the House, and say, okay, here's a bill to lower everybody's taxes in the country except of income over $250,000. That places the onus on them to obviously not lower my taxes, because I make less than that, in order to preserve the taxes of the people who belong to the Board of Trustees at Colgate. That politics ought to be simple for him. And if he doesn't do that, then Professor Brackett might be onto something about where the money's going. Because that just seems so obvious to me, that you put the pressure on the House Republicans to not lower everyone else's taxes when the Senate has already passed a bill to do so because they refuse to change the tax rate for people over $250,000.
A huge reason why there's only 400 registered voters at Colgate is because I'm not registered in this county because I'm from Colorado. My vote counts a lot more for president in Colorado than it does in New York.
Yeah.
Can you speak on the Electoral College and its impact?
Yes, I'd like to speak on the Electoral College. Get rid of it. It's an abomination. It was designed to protect the interests of slave states in 1787. It's bad.
I agree.
Yeah, it's bad. We should get rid of it.
Were you surprised that John McCain garnered 2 million more votes than Romney did in the populist vote?
I guess not, is my honest answer. I'd have to think about why that happened. I think turnout in general was a little bit lower this time, right, than last time. Yeah, but I haven't had a chance to really think about what that means. Yeah. Yes?
How much did Romney's offshore monies affect the voting, do you think?
Not much. I mean, again, let me just say that I believe in the fundamental tectonic plates of American politics. So if Mitt Romney didn't have accounts offshore, I think he would have lost. If Mitt Romney didn't work for Bain Capital, I think he would have lost. If Mitt Romney wasn't Mitt Romney, I think he would have lost. I would like to argue that it had nothing to do with Mitt Romney. And the reason I want to argue that is that when I turn on TV, it's all about Mitt Romney. And I get frustrated because all we hear is journalists talking to each other. There's an academic discipline out there, it's called political science, and we study why political parties advance at certain times and not. And it's not about Mitt Romney or his hairdo or his children or anything like that, or even his religion. So that's to say some things that Mitt Romney did, like having money offshore, may well have hurt him. I'm not arguing that they didn't. I'm just trying to put a little bit of the weight on the other side of the scale, which says that it's really not about him. It's about how the American public is structured at the moment, what sort of issues are at the heart of our political debate, and which political party is advanced by that circumstance, and which political party is hurt. So my guess is that it's not a good thing for a candidate to say, I've got money in the Cayman Islands, all things being equal, but I don't think it cost him the election. Yeah.
You said you think the partisan cleavage going forward could be getting the Board of Trustees to pay for the state?
Yeah.
I mean, will that like work in the short run? That if like the Democrats with the party were going to give free goodies that we can't pay for, when in reality we can't like pay for the state we have now, and it's just going to grow in the future that they're going to be on the losing end of that argument?
No, I don't think so. I don't agree with the premise that, first of all, we give away things free. It is true that the American public has a great desire for things that it's not interested in paying for. That is true. And we need to have a change in American political rhetoric, both in the United States and particularly in Europe. But growth, as you know, as an economics major, solves a lot of problems. A lot of problems. And so I also would remind us all that when Bill Clinton left office on January 20th, 2001, the American budget was in surplus. So can it be done? Yes, it can be done. Is it painful? Not for people who have a lot of money. Will there have to be cuts in entitlements? Of course, I've been saying for decades. Why is it that we think that old people should be allowed to lap at the public trough and uninsured children should have to fend for their own? So I'm all in favor of having fights about entitlement programs and who gets what, where, and when. But on the taxation issue, it seems to me that this ought to be a clear winner for the Democrats. Clear winner for the Democrats. If you can say, who among us, you don't have to identify yourselves, but who among us in this room thinks or disagrees with Bill Kristol that if we change tax policy from 36% to 36.9% on income over $250,000, that that's going to destroy the American economy? Nobody thinks that, except people who make a lot of money. And that's perfectly reasonable for them to defend their interests in that way. But they're a very narrow slice of the population. And what the Democratic Party needs to do is to mobilize people who don't belong to that slice of the population and convince the middle class that their class enemies are them, not people making $40,000.
So if Hillary Clinton is running for the Democratic Party in 2016, who's running for the Republicans?
Well, I have no idea, and it doesn't matter. Look, I'll tell you what I think. The Republicans today are about where the Democrats were in 1985, right? Mondale had just lost. You'll say, oh, well, that was a landslide. This wasn't. Well, this wasn't a landslide because financial crises take 6 to 8 years to work themselves through an economy. If you had a normal recovery and we were at 3.8% unemployment with 3.5% economic growth, Barack Obama would have won not 49 states, because the South is not going to vote for him, but he would have won about 40, and he would have probably won by 7 or 8 points in the popular vote. So we're about where the Democrats were with Walter Mondale. So what are we going to do, Republicans? Find Michael Dukakis and throw him as a sacrificial lamb into the mall. So I assume that the Republicans will spend the next 4 years fighting with each other, trying to come up with this sort of a Michael Dukakis candidate who will lose, and then they'll come to their senses and recognize these kind of fundamental factors that I'm talking about. And they'll nominate either, as I was saying at lunch, Dwight Eisenhower, their version of Dwight Eisenhower, who until about 15 minutes ago I thought was David Petraeus. Oh, by the way, I think he's still qualified, I don't care. Or their Bill Clinton. So it'll either be a sort of a consensus figure who can rise above the divisions in the party, or a really slippery figure who can fool everybody into what he really thinks. But that's down the road, yeah.
How did religion affect the election?
Well, religion affects I study religion and politics, so religion affects the election in the sense that the coalitions that we're talking about do have a certain kind of religious content to them. So, for example, evangelical Protestants overwhelmingly vote Republican and have been doing so since about 1978. Catholics tend to be a kind of a swing vote, right? The Catholics almost always vote for the winner. They did so again, I think it was 50-47 this time. The Jewish vote did drop a little bit for Obama, which is interesting and worthy of attention to see how the kind of Bibi Netanyahu phenomenon affected Jewish votes. But I do think one of the really interesting things about this election, and indeed historic, is that a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints ran for president, and it was kind of a yawn, you know, at the end. I mean, I'm sure there are some pockets of evangelicals who don't consider him a Christian and consider him a member of a cult and would never, you know, you hear these things on TV. But sort of mainstream political discourse, the fact that Mitt Romney belonged to, as what he always called, his church. Here are two words that Mitt Romney almost never uttered: Mormon and Massachusetts. He talked about his church and his state, but he very rarely told us which ones those were. And that was interesting, but I think that when we look back in history, Mitt Romney will be given an enormous amount of credit for how well, how respectfully, and how with dignity he ran as a Mormon. And I think that will help whoever the John Kennedy Mormon is someday be the first Mormon president of the United States. I just don't think it was that big a deal. But hey, I live here, so you know, I know there are some places in the country where it is. Here it sort of isn't. Yes?
I think Cuomo and Gillibrand are poised to jump into the national...
Well, yeah, I said Hillary Rodham Clinton just because that's sort of fun and they get to rise. I should say the Democrat will win. I think Andy Cuomo is running for president, right? So I have my doubts about Mr. Cuomo's political skill. He's one of these people, the opposite of Obama. I think he's better at being governor than running for governor. So I'm not sure how well Andrew Cuomo would kind of sit with the American public in general. Kirsten Gillibrand, I've been hearing this. This really interests me. I got to think about that too. Kirsten Gillibrand as president of the United States. I suppose, why not? Any state-level politician in New York is by definition papabile, as they say in the Catholic Church, could be Pope. You know, she could be president, I suppose. But I have not seen that kind of energy from her heretofore.
She has grassroots organizations in every state.
Well, look, she won like 75% of the vote, right? I mean, Kirsten Gillibrand, I'm not underestimating her as a politician. She's a good politician.
Chucky Schumer may not let her.
Yeah, well, can I tell you a really funny Chuck Schumer story? Don't tell him I told you. This is when Hillary Clinton first became the junior senator from New York. I have this on very good authority, a person who was there. And you know that subway system in the bottom of the Capitol where the members, if you haven't done it, you should go. The public is able to do it. And so there was a school group from New York, and Mrs. Clinton was getting off of the little subway, and there were about 30 kids, and the teacher said, "Oh, Senator Clinton, can we have your picture taken with the students?" And Senator Clinton, of course, said, "Oh, I'd be delighted." And the teacher then turned to a person she had no idea who it was and said to the senior senator from New York, would you mind taking the picture? Like I said, I was told that by someone who was there. And that sort of defines Chuck's life, doesn't it?
That's the first photo op he's ever missed.
Yeah, right. See him at the state fair eating his corn with the sign. Yeah. Anyone else? I think we're almost done, but I'll stay all day. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.